The bouquet hit the marble floor of the Chosin Hotel ballroom, with a sound like breaking glass, though no glass broke. 243 white peonies, imported that morning from Jeju Island, scattered across Kaia Whitmore's bare feet. She had kicked off her heels an hour ago. The champagne flute in her hand trembled so violently that Dom Perignon spilled down her wrist, staining the seam of a borrowed silver gown. Across the ballroom, standing beside a jazz quartet that had stopped playing without anyone telling them to, was Seok Jin Han, 6'2", black tuxedo, a jagged scar running from his left temple to the corner of his jaw that she had traced with her fingertip only 3 nights ago, believing him to be a man named David Choi, an antiques dealer from Busan. He was not an antiques dealer. The woman who had just slapped Kaia, Councilwoman Park's daughter, all pearl earrings and shaking rage, was still screaming in Korean, and the words that Kaia caught, the words she understood from 6 months of clumsy lessons on her lunch breaks, were murderer and thief, and he was mine first. Kaia's mother had raised her in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Baltimore on the wages of a hospital cafeteria worker. Kaia had ridden 3 buses to a magnet school. She had put herself through Morgan State with 2 jobs and a scholarship that required a 3.8 GPA she had never let slip. She had never, in 31 years, been the woman with peonies at her feet and a bodyguard's hand hovering near a holster 12 feet away. But someone had been sending her flowers every Thursday for 2 years. And she had thought, she had thought, they were from someone else entirely. But to understand how Kaia ended up here, we need to go back. If you've ever loved someone who didn't deserve you, if you've ever bent yourself into a shape small enough to fit inside someone else's life while they took up all the room in yours, this story is for you. This is a story about a woman who spent her whole life being the reliable one, the one who paid the bills, remembered the birthdays, worked the double shifts. And it's about what happens when the person who actually saw her, really saw her, from across the world, in silence, for 2 years, turned out to be the last person on earth she would have chosen. Before we go any further, if you believe women deserve to be chosen, not just tolerated, hit that subscribe button and drop the word "seen" in the comments. Let me know you're here, because what happens to Kaia next is going to shake you. Let's go back to the beginning. 2 years and 4 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning in October, Kaia Whitmore woke up in the apartment she shared with her fiancé, Marcus Ellery, and did what she had done every morning for the previous 6 years. She made his coffee first, 2 sugars, a splash of oat milk. She set the mug on the nightstand beside him, kissed the crown of his head where the hair was starting to thin, and went into the bathroom to get ready for her job as a senior curator at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore. She was 30 years old. She had been engaged for 4 of those 6 years. The ring on her finger had been her grandmother's, because Marcus was saving up for something better. Marcus was an aspiring novelist. He had been aspiring for the entire duration of their relationship. His novel, tentatively titled The Cartography of Silence, was in its 9th draft. Kaia had read every version. She had learned to say things like the pacing in Chapter 4 is really finding its rhythm without lying outright, because Marcus did not respond well to notes. She paid the rent on their Federal Hill apartment. She paid the utilities. She paid for the groceries and the streaming services and the wine he liked, which was Malbec, and the wine he tolerated when she bought it for herself, which was anything cheaper than $16 a bottle. On her salary, $62,000 a year, before taxes. This required a spreadsheet she updated on Sunday nights, while Marcus watched foreign films in the other room and told her the whole point of art was that it didn't require budgets. Her mother, Delphine, had raised her alone after Kaia's father walked out when she was 7. Delphine worked 40-hour weeks at Johns Hopkins Hospital until her back gave out at 59, and now she lived in a subsidized senior apartment in Waverly on Social Security and the $400 Kaia sent every month. When Delphine asked gently when Kaia and Marcus would set a wedding date, Kaia would smile and say soon, "Mama, he's just finishing his book." Her best friend Imani said other things. Imani said things like, "He's a grown man playing writer while you work yourself into the grave. And your grandmother's ring is not a placeholder, Kaia. It's an heirloom, and he's using it like collateral. Imani was a public defender who did not have patience for people who wasted other people's lives. Kaia loved her for it and hated her for it in equal measure. The lie Kaia believed was this: that love was measured in what you were willing to give up. That the woman who could hold everything together, the bills, the emotions, the ego of a man who called himself a writer while writing very little, was the woman who deserved to be loved back, eventually. That patience was a currency, and one day Marcus would pay her in full. She was very, very wrong. The flowers started arriving on a Thursday in November, 3 weeks after her 30th birthday. White peonies, always white peonies, delivered to the front desk of the Walters Art Museum with a small card that said, "Only for you." No name, no return address. The florist's card was from a shop called Soane's Blossoms on Charles Street, and when Kaia called them, the woman on the phone said only that the order had been prepaid for 2 years in advance, and that the sender had asked for absolute anonymity. Kaia assumed, because she was a woman who had been trained by 6 years of Marcus Ellery to expect crumbs, that the flowers must be from him, a romantic gesture, a promise of the wedding to come. When she thanked him that night, Marcus looked confused for exactly half a second, before his face rearranged into something warm. "Of course, baby," he said. "You deserve them." He never sent another flower after that. He didn't need to. She had already given him credit for 2 years' worth. The Walters was preparing a major exhibition on Joseon Dynasty porcelain, and in January of the following year, a private collector reached out to loan 3 pieces from his personal collection, pieces that had been missing from public record for over a century. The email came from a Mr. David Choi, who identified himself as an antiques dealer based in Busan, with holdings in New York. Kaia was assigned as the curator liaison because she had studied East Asian ceramics as her graduate concentration, and because, as her director put it, nobody on this staff can code switch between museum board and old money collector like you can. David Choi arrived at the Walters on a Wednesday afternoon in February, and Kaia's first thought when she saw him standing in the marble atrium was that he did not look like any antiques dealer she had ever met. He was tall, noticeably tall, and his suit fit in the way suits fit when they have been made for one body and one body only. There was a scar on his left temple that ran down to the corner of his jaw, thin and pale, and he wore no jewelry except a plain black watch. He spoke English with a precision that suggested he had learned it late but studied it obsessively. He was polite in the way of men who had been raised to understand that politeness was a language of power. And when Kaia extended her hand to introduce herself, he held it for exactly the correct length of time, and then he said something that made the small hairs on the back of her neck lift. "Ms. Whitmore, I have been looking forward to meeting you. Not to meeting the curator, to meeting her." She told herself she had imagined the emphasis. She walked him through the exhibition floor. He asked intelligent questions about lighting temperature and case humidity. He remembered the names of her assistants. When she brought him tea in her office, he thanked her in Korean, "Gomapsiamnida," and then apologized in English for the presumption. Over the following 4 months, David Choi returned to Baltimore 6 times. Each visit lasted 2 or 3 days. Each visit produced another donated piece for the exhibition, each one more extraordinary than the last, until the Walters had assembled a collection that would make the New York Times Arts section and put Kaia's name in the byline of every article about it. He took her to dinner 3 times. The first was professional, a working meal at Charleston in Harbor East, where they discussed provenance and insurance riders. The second was less so, at a small ramen place in Fells Point that he claimed had the best broth outside Seoul. The third was on a Saturday in May, at a rooftop restaurant she had never been able to afford, where he ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than her monthly rent, and asked her, quietly, whether the man whose ring she wore was good to her. She said yes. She meant to say yes. What came out was, "He's trying." David Choi looked at her for a long moment. His face did not change exactly, but something in his eyes did, a stillness that felt older than his 42 years, older than anything Kaia had ever encountered in a man raised in her own country. He set down his glass. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "may I tell you something? Not as a colleague, as a man who has spent time in your company. She nodded because her throat had stopped working. You are not a woman who should have to hope her partner is trying. You are a woman for whom men should be capable of extraordinary things. She went home that night and cried in the bathroom for 40 minutes, while Marcus watched a Bellatar film in the living room and did not notice. The following Thursday, when Kaia arrived at work, there were no flowers on her desk. For the first time in 18 months, no white peonies, no unsigned card, just an empty vase where they should have been, and a receptionist named Anaya who looked apologetic and confused. Zones called this morning, Anaya said. They said the standing order has been temporarily paused. They wouldn't say why. Kaia felt the absence like a temperature drop. She had not realized until that moment how much she had come to depend on those flowers, on the small weekly proof that somewhere in the world, someone was thinking of her. She had assumed still that they came from Marcus, though she had begun to notice that Marcus never asked whether they had arrived, never mentioned them, never seemed to remember they existed. That evening, she stopped at Zone's Blossoms on her way home. It was a small shop on Charles Street, run by an older Korean woman with silver hair pulled back in a low bun. Mrs. Sohn was arranging chrysanthemums in a ceramic vase when Kaia walked in, and when she saw Kaia's face, she set down her shears and folded her hands on the counter. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "I have been expecting you would come one day." Kaia's stomach dropped. "The order," Kaia said. "The peonies. Who sends them?" Mrs. Sohn was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I promised I would never say. But I did not promise what I would do if you asked me directly, and I am too old to lie to a woman's face." She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small ledger bound in black leather. She turned it to a page marked with a slip of red paper. She turned the ledger toward Kaia. The sender's name, written in careful Hangul and translated in a small hand beneath it, was Han Sok-jin, not David Choi. Kaia stared at the name. It meant nothing to her. She looked up at Mrs. Sohn, who was watching her with an expression that was not unkind, but was very, very careful. "Do you know who he is?" Mrs. Sohn asked. "He's an antiques dealer," Kaia said. "From Busan." Mrs. Sohn closed the ledger. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached under the counter again and pulled out a folded newspaper, a Korean language paper Kaia could not read, and turned it to a page near the back. She pointed at a photograph. The man in the photograph was David Choi, except the caption, which Mrs. Sohn read aloud in translation, identified him as Han Seok-jin, 38, the youngest son of the late Han Do-yoon, and the current head of the Han family's international logistics and private security holdings, a family that the paper described, in careful legal language, as long associated with organized activity in the Busan Port District. He was not an antiques dealer. He was the boss of one of the largest Korean crime syndicates on the West Pacific Rim. He had been sending her flowers for 2 years. Kaia walked out of the shop into the cold Baltimore evening and did not remember the walk home. When she reached her apartment, Marcus was on the couch, laptop open, and he looked up and said, "Hey babe, did you pick up the wine?" And Kaia said no. And Marcus sighed the sigh of a man mildly disappointed by his household staff. And Kaia went into the bedroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that she was in a great deal of danger, and not from the man she had thought. Imani took one look at her the next morning and said, "We are going somewhere neither of us can afford breakfast, and you are telling me everything." They sat at a corner table at the Ivy Hotel restaurant, and Kaia told her, all of it, the flowers, the exhibition, David Choi who was not David Choi, the photograph in the Korean paper, Marcus, who had never once asked her a question about her day that she could remember answering with the truth. Imani listened without interrupting, which was not her usual practice. When Kaia finished, Imani took a long sip of her coffee and set the cup down. "Okay," she said. "First of all, you are not going to marry Marcus Ellery." "Imani!" "I'm not finished. Second of all, this man, Han, whoever, has not actually done anything to you. He sent you flowers. He was polite. He did not touch you. He did not lie about being a criminal because you didn't ask. He lied about his name, which is a lie. But it is not the lie that's ruining your life. You know what's ruining your life? Kaia did not answer. Marcus is ruining your life. Marcus has been ruining your life for 6 years. And you are about to blow up your engagement because a stranger noticed you. And you're going to tell yourself the reason is the stranger. But the reason is that you've been drowning, and someone finally threw you a rope, and now you have to admit that the person on the shore was watching you drown the whole time. Kaia put her face in her hands. What do I do? Imani leaned forward. I'm not going to rescue you, she said. I love you, but I'm not going to. Here's what I will do. I will introduce you to my colleague, Riva Osi. She's a forensic accountant. She works with women who are financially entangled with partners who don't deserve them. She's going to walk you through what you actually own, what Marcus actually owes you, and how to leave without getting robbed on the way out. That's the tool. You have to use it. And Han? Imani's face got very serious. That's a different conversation. You need to decide, before you have it, whether you're afraid of him or whether you're afraid of what you feel. Because those are two different problems, and you can only solve one of them at a time. If you're afraid of him, we call the FBI. If you're afraid of what you feel, you go talk to him, in public, in daylight, with your phone on record and me 2 blocks away, and you ask him directly what he wants. Kaia thought about the way he had looked at her over the wine glass, the stillness. You are a woman for whom men should be capable of extraordinary things. I don't think he's going to hurt me, she said. That is not the same as him being safe, Imani said. Understand the difference. He might be honest with you. He might mean every word he said. And he might still be a man whose life will get you killed in a way that has nothing to do with him wanting to hurt you. So when you go to see him, and you're going to go, I can see it on your face, you go with your eyes open. You go knowing what you're walking toward, and you tell him the truth. Because if he can't handle the truth from you, then he was never going to be safe anyway. Kaia nodded slowly. There's one more thing, Imani said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. Riva's number. Call her today, not tomorrow. Today. Because whatever you decide about the Korean, the first person you have to leave is Marcus, and that's the leaving that's going to be hard. Kaia called Riva Osi that afternoon. Riva was a compact woman in her 50s, with locks going gray at the temples and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She met Kaia in a conference room in the public defender's office building, and for 3 hours she walked Kaia through the financial anatomy of her own life. The results were staggering. Over 6 years, Kaia had paid roughly $187,000 in shared expenses that Marcus had not contributed to. Marcus had, in that same period, published 2 short stories in literary magazines that paid a combined total of $420. He had, at 3 separate points, borrowed money from Kaia, money he had characterized as loans, that totaled just over $11,000, none of it repaid. The lease on their apartment was in Kaia's name alone. The utilities were in Kaia's name alone. Marcus's name appeared on nothing that would tie him to any legal obligation. He's not just a bad partner, Riva said, tapping the spreadsheet. He's a financial parasite. And the good news, ironically, is that he's such a parasite that leaving him is going to be surgically clean. You don't owe him anything. He owes you $11,000, and we're going to get it. Kaia went home that night and did not make Marcus's coffee. In the morning, she packed a suitcase while he was still asleep and left it by the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited for him to wake up, and when he did, she said the words she had been rehearsing in the shower for an hour. Marcus, I'm ending the engagement. I've contacted a lawyer. You have 30 days to vacate the apartment. You owe me $11,000, which I expect to be repaid on a schedule my lawyer will send you. Please do not contact my mother or my friends. If you need to reach me, do it through the lawyer. Marcus sat up very slowly. His face went through 6 expressions in 5 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, offense, calculation, hurt. And finally, the one she had been waiting for, contempt. "You've lost your mind," he said. "This is about that Korean guy, isn't it? Yeah, I read your emails. You think I don't notice things?" "You don't," Kaia said. "You never have. That's the point. You're throwing away 6 years. I'm reclaiming 6 years." He stood up. He was taller than her. He had never hit her, but he stepped close enough now that she felt the air move, and she understood, in that moment, exactly what kind of man she had been engaged to. She did not step back. "Get dressed," she said. "I'm leaving. When I come back tonight, if you're still here, I will call the police, and Riva Ose will file the paperwork she already has on her desk. Do you understand me?" He understood her. "If you're still with me, if this is hitting somewhere real, if you've ever had to be the one to walk out of your own home to save your own life, do me a favor and hit that like button and tell me in the comments, I chose me too. Because what Kaia does next is going to require every ounce of that same courage." Kaia walked out of the apartment with her suitcase and got on the light rail to the Marriott downtown, where Riva had booked her a room under a corporate account, and she sat on the edge of a hotel bed at 9:30 in the morning and, for the first time in 6 years, cried without worrying about who would hear her. Then she opened her laptop and drafted an email to a man she still, technically, only knew as David Choi. "Mr. Choi," she wrote, "I know your name is not David Choi. I know who you are. I would like to meet you tomorrow at 11 a.m. in the reading room of the Enoch Pratt Library on Cathedral Street. I will not be alone, but I will speak to you alone if you agree to be searched by my associate. Please confirm." She sent it. He replied in 19 minutes. "I will be there. I am glad you know. SJH." He came alone. That was the first thing that surprised her. He walked into the reading room of the Pratt Library at 11 exactly, wearing a charcoal overcoat and no scarf, and he stood at the entrance and let Imani, wearing a public defender's blazer and an expression that could strip paint, pat him down in full view of a security guard Imani had briefed the previous evening. He submitted to it without a word. He removed his overcoat. He handed over his phone. He waited to be told he could sit. Kaia sat across from him at a long oak table beneath a stained glass window. Imani sat at a table 20 feet away, laptop open, one hand on her phone. "Your name," Kaia said. "Han Seok-jin. Your business. Import and export, primarily maritime shipping through the port of Busan. Private security. Some legitimate holdings in Korean real estate and construction. Other holdings that are less legitimate. I will not lie to you about any of it. Ask me anything." "Have you ever ordered a person killed?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Once, 9 years ago, a man who had killed my sister. I do not regret it, and I will not pretend to. I have not ordered another death since. I am telling you the truth because you asked, and because I made a decision 2 years ago that I would never lie to you about anything, including things you had not yet asked." 2 years ago, Kaia said, "when you started sending the flowers." "Yes. Why did you start?" He looked at his hands on the table for a moment before he answered. "I came to the Walters in October of that year, on my own, without an appointment. I had heard the museum had acquired a Goryeo Celadon that I believed had been stolen from my grandfather's collection during the Korean War. I wanted to see it. I stood in the gallery for a long time, and a woman came in, you, and you saw me and you asked, in the tone of someone who was genuinely curious, whether I was seeing anything I recognized. You did not know me. You had no reason to be kind to me. You were kind anyway, and then you told me the provenance of the piece, that the museum had acquired it from a dealer whose reputation was in question, and that you had been trying, for 2 years, to trace it back to a family in Busan, whose name had been lost. My family's name." Kaia stared at him. "I didn't remember that conversation. I did not expect you to. It lasted 11 minutes. You changed the direction of the museum's research because of it, and my family's name is on the placard in that gallery today. You have never mentioned it because you did not know you had done it for me. You did it because it was the right thing to do. So the flowers were gratitude." The flowers were the only way I could find to be present in your life without being a danger to you. I did not know if I ever intended to meet you. I told myself I did not. That was also a lie. And when you came back, as David Choi, I told myself I would help the museum, then leave. I did not intend for us to have dinner. I did not intend to ask about your engagement. I broke my own promise to myself at that rooftop, and I have paid for it every day since. If you want me to leave your life today, I will leave, and the flowers will stop, and you will not hear from me again. I will not be angry. I will not be a threat to you or to anyone you love. I want you to know that before you say anything else." Kaia was quiet for a long moment. She could feel Imani watching her. She could feel her own pulse in her wrist. "I want to know one more thing," she said. "The peonies, 243 of them every Thursday. Why that number?" For the first time, he smiled, a small, private smile that changed his face entirely. "It is the number of days between my sister's birth and her death," he said. "She was 6 months old. I send them because I promised her, when I was 12 years old and holding her the day she died, that I would spend my life noticing what was beautiful. You are the most beautiful thing I have noticed, Ms. Whitmore. That is all the flowers have ever meant." Kaia found she was crying. She did not try to stop. "My name is Kaia," she said. "You should call me Kaia." 3 weeks later, Marcus showed up at her mother's apartment in Waverly. He did not have Kaia's new address. Riva had made sure of that. But he knew where Delphine lived, because Kaia had brought him to Sunday dinners for 6 years, and he had a photographic memory for the addresses of people who might one day be useful to him. He rang the buzzer at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, and when Delphine let him up because she was too polite not to, he sat on her plastic slip-covered sofa and asked her gently to call her daughter. Delphine called Kaia. Kaia was at a wine bar 2 miles away with Seok Jin. She stood up so fast she knocked over her water glass. "Mama, listen to me. Do not offer him anything. Do not let him touch anything. Go into the bathroom and lock the door. I'm on my way." Seok Jin drove. He did not ask questions. He did not offer to come inside with her. He parked half a block down and said, "I will be here. Call if you need me. Do not call if you do not." Kaia walked up the 4 flights of stairs to her mother's apartment. She knocked. She heard Marcus's voice say it's open in her mother's home, as if he owned it, and something inside her that had been bending for 6 years snapped clean. She opened the door. "Get out." Marcus stood up from the sofa. He had rehearsed. She could tell. He had a small speech prepared about grief and process, and how he had been reading a book about attachment styles, and how he understood now what he had failed to give her, and how he was willing, he used the word willing as if it were a gift, to attend couples counseling. "Marcus, get out of my mother's apartment. If you contact her again, I will file a restraining order, and I will make sure every literary magazine in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are. Do you understand me?" "Kaia." "You do not get to say my name in this room." He stared at her, and then his face did the thing it always did. When charm failed, it curdled. "You think that gangster is going to marry you? You think he sees a future with a woman like you? He's slumming, Kaia. He's going to get bored and go back to Seoul, and you're going to be a 32-year-old museum curator with a story nobody believes." Delphine came out of the bathroom. She was 63 years old. She was 5'2". She walked up to Marcus and pointed at the door. "Baby," she said to Kaia without looking at her, "you were always too good for him. I should have said it sooner. Marcus, get out of my house." He left. Kaia sat on her mother's sofa and put her head in her mother's lap, the way she had when she was 7 years old and her father had just walked out, and Delphine stroked her hair and said, "You did that all by yourself, baby. You did that all by yourself." 6 months later, Kaia was promoted to Chief Curator of Asian Art at the Walters Art Museum. Her salary went from $62,000 a year to $98,000. The Joseon exhibition, which had opened to reviews in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and ART News, had brought the museum record attendance for its winter season and had established Kaia, at 31, as one of the most watched young curators in her field. The promotion had nothing to do with Seokjin. She made sure of that. She had, in fact, refused every gift he had offered her in the months since the library meeting. The apartment he wanted to lease for her, the car he wanted to buy her, the security detail he had gently suggested, and she had firmly declined. She had told him at their fourth dinner that if this was going to work, it would work because she stood on her own 2 feet, or it would not work at all. He had listened. He had adjusted. He had never offered any of those things again. She used her raise to move into a 1-bedroom apartment in Bolton Hill, with a bay window and a fire escape she could put a small herb garden on. She paid off the remaining $21,000 of her graduate school debt in a single lump sum, and she took a photograph of the paid in full letter and framed it on her bedroom wall. She moved her mother into a nicer apartment in Charles Village, 3 blocks from a grocery store Delphine could walk to, and she paid the difference in rent out of the money Marcus had. After 4 months of Riva Osei's polite but relentless correspondence, been forced to repay, she started saving. For the first time in her adult life, she had a savings account that grew instead of hemorrhaging. She started taking Korean lessons in earnest, twice a week with a tutor from the university, not for Seokjin, but because she had spent her career studying Korean art and had always felt the shame of doing so without the language. She started sleeping through the night. She started laughing without checking first to see if it was too loud. She started to understand, in a way she had not understood before, that the woman she had been afraid to be, the woman who took up space, who said no, who cost more than she was willing to give, was the woman she had always been underneath. That woman had not needed to be built. That woman had needed to be unburied. Seokjin proposed to her a year and 2 months after the library meeting. He did it badly. He did it in her kitchen on a Tuesday, while she was making him tea because he had a cold. And he said, "I have been trying to think of a beautiful way to ask you this, and I have realized that there is no way more beautiful than the way we live already. So I'm going to ask you here, while you are making me tea, because this is what our life is." He offered her a ring, a plain gold band, no stone, and said, "I do not want to buy your yes. I want to ask for it." She said yes. She also said, "I have terms." He smiled. He said, "Of course you do." The terms were these. He would not conduct any of the less legitimate parts of his business on American soil, ever. He would begin within a year a documented and legally supervised transition of the less legitimate parts of his family's holdings into the fully legitimate holdings, a transition he had, in fact, already begun 8 months earlier, at his own initiative. He would not lie to her. He would not lie to her mother. He would not lie to her friends. He would not offer her money except in the form of shared household expenses on a 50-50 basis, calculated by percentage of income, until such time as they were legally married, and then only on terms she herself said. He agreed to all of it. He had, she realized, been waiting to be asked. She asked him in return what he needed from her. He thought about it for a long time. "I need you to tell me," he said, "when I am being someone other than the man you agreed to marry. I have spent my whole life being watched by people who were afraid of me. I would like, for the rest of my life, to be watched by one person who is not." She said she would. They were married in a small ceremony at her mother's church in Waverly, 22 people in attendance, no press, no bodyguards inside the sanctuary. Delphine walked her daughter down the aisle. Imani was the maid of honor and cried through the entire ceremony and denied it afterward. She didn't get a fairy tale. She got something better. She got herself back. The woman underneath 6 years of coffee she should not have been making, 6 years of bills she should not have been paying alone, 6 years of a name she had let a man mispronounce because she was too tired to correct him. She got the promotion she had earned, the apartment she had chosen, the mother she had rescued, the friend who had refused to rescue her and had loved her too well to let her be rescued by anyone else. And she got a man who had watched her in silence for 2 years, not to possess her, but because he had promised his baby sister he would spend his life noticing what was beautiful, and who had waited, without ever demanding, for her to be ready to be noticed back. If this story reached you, If you saw yourself in Kaia, in the shape you have bent yourself into for someone who did not see you, leave a comment and tell me the moment you started to unbend. Share this with the woman in your life who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because next week I have a story about a woman who found out on her wedding day that her groom had a second family, and what she did with the microphone. Kaia Whitmore did not get saved. She saved herself. And then, and only then, did she let herself be loved. That's the ending worth waiting for.